Welcome to another episode of Beckn&Beyond, an informal yet insightful discussion forum that kind of brings together the network enablers who share their experiences and perspectives on fostering the growth of Beckn protocol. So, today with me, I have a very special guest, Anit Mukherjee. So, welcome, Anit, to the show.
Thank you.
I will leave you the chance to kind of introduce yourselves. But before we do that, I just wanted to give our audience a feel of, mm, kind of the idea of your association with Beckn from the very early days, right? So Anit has been a champion in the stories of Aadhaar and UPI. And keeping that legacy up, I think he has been one of the very early pioneers of Beckn, and he has two of the ongoing missions, which is happening, one in Gambia and one in Belen. So just as a pretext, Anit, if you could help us with a very short idea of these two missions, what these two missions are about, I think that will be a very good starting point. We will dive deep into the nitty-gritties of those missions later, but just on a very broad format, if you can give us an idea.
Well, thank you, Anirban, and also the Beckn community, especially Dheeraj and others who have, Sonam, who have invited me to this. I'm Anit Mukherjee. I am a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation America. We are a think tank, affiliate of Observer Research Foundation in India, but we are a separate entity. We work in diverse areas, starting off with geostrategic affairs, politics, geopolitics, foreign policy, but where I head the economic growth, economic development portfolio. And over the last year, my job has been to accompany India's G20 process. And I'm trying to understand and unpack what is it that India is good at doing and how we can bring the India story to a global audience. And that culminated in the Leaders' Declaration in September, which essentially moves the discussion within the G20 into the realm of what it was always supposed to do, which is global development and trying to achieve sustainable development goals. All these words I'm sure you've heard. But the interesting thing that why we are, Anirban mentioned these two missions, is that there are two things that are very important to understand, critical to understand. After India's presidency, it's Brazil, which is taking on the presidency of the G20. And Brazil is a country in geographic size much larger than India, obviously with a smaller population. And the second important thing that has happened is the introduction or induction of the African Union as a member, full member of the G20. And therefore, the idea that this is becoming more inclusive and how can India's, whatever we are doing, especially in the technology space, how can that be taken to a broader global audience? And we'll talk about the missions in detail. But just to say, first of all, that I'm extremely happy. I see about 31 participants, and this is the day after the Shera. And for us Bengalis like Anirban and me, we're Vijaya, so the festive season is still on. So it's late in the evening as well. So I'm really glad and happy to be here, and I hope we can have a discussion on the issues that concern all of us.
Super. So, and I think now the audience got a kind of hang of Anit's association long back with us. I mean, I think it dates somewhere, I think around 2019 or 20. So, great. So now, Anit, you already talked about your role, right, at ORF America and kind of what you have been doing earlier. So with that, most of the people who are here are kind of Indian audience. So there is something that I would like to know from you. I mean, within the Indian ecosystem, we talk a lot about the technological leapfrog that we have already made, right? Be it payments, ID, FASTag, DigiLocker, many such instances. We have seen a lot of these success stories, what we like to say. I mean, we have been on top of the global payments, like we have beaten China and all of these things. But from your side, from your vantage point, given an outside in view, given that your long association with the World Banks and IMFs of the world, can you give us a kind of an insight how the world is looking into this. I mean, how India has kind of seen the growth over the last 20 years, whether the world is perceiving it in the same way, or there are differences in the western sides and the eastern sides of the globe.
So I think the perception of India has changed very dramatically over the last, I would say, 15 years. I've been in global development in various capacities uh, for 20 years now. And when I was at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy in India, we used to negotiate with the World Bank to get $1 billion or so for a health project or an education project, or even smaller amounts with other donors. Um, Today, if I see the discussion, like I had a conversation with the USAID, which is their development agency, and they were very clear that they don't look at India as just a place to invest in development, core development. They would like to look at India as a partner where they can collaborate with India. Yes, there are serious challenges still, but the perception of India as, oh, we need to invest there because we need to fix their water supply or fix their education or fix their health, that has changed. That perception has changed. So the idea that India is dependent on aid for its development is no longer there. The second thing, and I alluded to it, is that even in the World Bank and IMF and large global institutions, uh, the India portfolio is still large because of the previous projects that have been funded, but the new money that is coming in from the World Bank, IMF, is really small. And that is also because of this shift in the macroeconomic outlook that India has. It is the fastest growing developing country in the world today. So with a 7% growth, and generally considered to be a stable macro fiscal environment. So for now, for India, is the idea is that we will be a partner rather than a recipient of global development assistance and policy. And that we saw very clearly. And let me do a bit wonky think tank stuff. When the Sri Lanka crisis happened, and I used to live in Sri Lanka for for a few years in early 2000, 2010, 2011, India was the first one who stepped up to open a line of credit to Sri Lanka to say, you have a macroeconomic crisis. Here is $2 billion. Buy food, buy milk, buy petroleum, get your economy, on track. And then they went to the IMF and they negotiated a package. So it's kind of coming a full circle from 91 when we had to go to the IMF to ask for a fiscal package. So I think all these, and I'll come to the digital part. I think I want to just emphasize that in a global context, the perception of India has changed dramatically. Yes, there are challenges. We are still a developing country, we're still a low income country, but the fact that today we can actually give an assistance to Sri Lanka in its time of crisis has changed that perception. On the tech, I think for a long time when the tech boom started in the Y2K, I remember for those of us who are over 50, we still remember those days. It were the Indian engineers and techies who went out and recoded a lot of the stuff, and that started the BPO boom. So I think on the tech side, there've always been this idea that India is a tech superpower, and but it was more of what we are, you know, we are basically catering to a market in the US or in Europe. And the change that has happened from 2015, I would say, is that the model that India is following in technology, as technology in the service of development, as we call it, that is a new thing. And that is something that the world is looking very closely at. How did we manage to give a digital ID within 5 years to almost the whole population? How did we manage to create regulations which enabled opening of 500 million bank accounts, and most of them were women? How are we managing the digital payments infrastructure without creating monopolies in that space? What are the other things that India is doing, for example, on the DigiLocker or FASTag? By the way, these are not very well known yet because these are very
Correct.
India specific.
Hmm.
But the big news, the big thing, and that is what we are talking about, is what's next? What's the next big thing? So it's always the global community looks at, oh, this is done. Then what do we do next? And the next thing is actually open networks, and this is what we're discussing today.
That's super. I mean, that helps us to. I mean, your answer kind of gave me the cue for the next question. So, you said that the global partners are looking India as a partner, right? Not anymore an investment ground. So, are you seeing any conflict in terms of approach? What I mean by that is Europe, US, these people, they have a very typical approach of like going after the monopolies and all those things. Whereas India is taking a very techno-legal kind of an approach where we are saying that we are not against the Amazon Flipkarts. We just want to create, open fields for everyone to participate. It's not about to kind of shut the business down of Amazon. It's about giving everybody a fair and, chance to kind of participate. Do you see any conflict in the type of approaches that we are taking, India is taking, and the Western side is taking, or how do you see the synergy there?
I think that's a great question, and not that I have a perfect answer for it, but um, I see it as three different models that are emerging in this space. One is the US model. So in the US, the model is we innovate, we don't regulate, right? We foster regulate innovation, yeah, get the entrepreneurship, startups, uh, but regulation is minimal, if at all, right? The European model is the second one, which I can characterize it as we regulate but don't innovate. So we are we will take the innovation that's coming, but we'll regulate it to make it compatible with European values, European markets. And you see this in the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act that were passed. And this is a very recent thing. If people haven't actually looked at these, I strongly suggest that you look at what Europe is doing in terms of regulation. And they did it earlier, the General Data Protection Rules, the GDPR, which a lot of other countries followed in terms of their digital data protection acts, including India. So, and the third, and which is the India model, is we regulate to innovate. So the US model is we innovate, we don't regulate. The European model is we regulate but don't innovate. And the third model that it's emerging out of India is we regulate to innovate. And what do I mean by that? If you look back, now UPI is for us, it's like, oh, it's old hat. But the the key element of this whole expansion of the formal banking system in India, the Jandhan accounts were open, was due to a regulatory change that the Reserve Bank of India brought in, which is EKYC. EKYC based on Aadhaar was a seminal change in a regulatory framework, which then allowed for hundreds of millions of people to be included in the formal banking ecosystem. I remember when I came back from Japan after my PhD in 2003, I went to open a bank account in State Bank of India, and I had a bank account in Calcutta, in State Bank of India, before I left for Japan. I was 30 years old, and I had a job. I needed two references from people who had accounts in the same branch to be able to open a bank account. Now, that is 2003. And from that to now, if you look at this 20-year journey, I don't think we can even understand what that change is about. And that happened because of a regulatory change. And then what it allowed is innovation. And at the same time, I work in mostly in public policy. I'm not a techie. I'm an economist. I work in public policy, and you if where I think the model India model is going is that you set a base regulation, for example, in eKYC, you keep building on that, and as the technology improves, as the market expands, you keep tweaking that basic regulatory framework and make it fit for purpose, fit for the times. And I see a lot of discussion, even in Europe, is, oh, we have this regulation that's set in stone, no more changes, right? So even with GDPR, there are challenges, and people they understand the challenges of doing business in a very onerous data protection framework for entrepreneurs like many of you here. Um, it increases setup costs, it increases entry barriers, right? Increases cost of operation, but the idea is, nope, we have this, that's it, you play by our rules, or you can leave the market. And I think the India story, and that's why the investment coming into India is so high, because we have this a sweet spot, I would say, and this sometimes we forget, that there is a policy and regulatory sweet spot. It's like we have a demographic dividend, and therefore our economy would grow. We are in a sweet spot. There is a sweet spot in policy and regulation, which is very difficult to attain, very difficult, and that I think we are close to it. I won't say that we are there, but we are close to it.
Super. So I will move to the next one, but before that, I will just kind of let people know that you guys can put in your queries in the chat, because we want to make this interactive. I think there is one or two questions coming in. We will take those up really soon. But before that, I just wanted to kind of ask Anit on one thing. Anit, you mentioned kind of a couple of pillars, right? You have talked about market, you have talked about, barriers of entry, barriers of expansion, the cost of operations and all. Can you just help us understand a bit more with your economist hat on that how these things are changing with the open networks, right? I mean, what was the difference with the earlier world, with the open network world, how these things are kind of changing?
No, thank you. So markets have always existed. If you look at millennia, right? After cavemen moved into agrarian societies, I think markets have always existed. It's the scale and the scope of those markets that determine how people are engaged in entrepreneurship, engaged in production, and to a certain extent, what determines their consumption. If you go to any village market, and then I used to work in villages in many parts of India, like including Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, in the south. One of my favorite pastimes was going to the village market and looking at the kind of produce that was available in a hut, village hut, like we call it, like even in Bengal. And the joke that I have is that you don't find broccoli in a village hut, right? So it is what you where the tastes of the people, what is the demand of the people, that determines the supply and the production and the production decisions, right? So obviously, at some point there might be broccolis, but I haven't seen. If anybody has seen broccolis in a village market, please let me know. So having a market, and having a market which is expanding, is the basis of entrepreneurship, right? Um, and then there are three factors. One is the barrier to entry, right? If you look, and again, I go back to the village market example. Most village markets you can just, and by the way, it's not only village. I used to live in Safdarjung Enclave in Delhi, and every Friday there was a local market where people would just come, vendors would come and set up their stalls, and there would be new vendors, but mostly existing vendors. And then they would go back, and they didn't have an established shop. So the barrier to entry is a huge barrier, and we know that from an economist or in any perspective, that if you can't enter the market, you can't sell, you can't transact, right? Then there is a barrier to continuing and expanding your business, which we are kind of reductively saying as access to credit. But it's not only access to credit, it's access to credit, regulation. And then I'll come to that in terms of digital markets later on. And the third is barrier to exit. And this is something that we don't understand or we don't think about very often, that if you can't exit the market, if your investment is not generating profits or at least compensating you for your time, then you need to exit. You need to find something else to do. And for a long time, at least in the Indian economy, in the physical economy, once you open a factory which employs more than I think 10 people, you you are stuck. You're stuck. You can't exit. Things have changed with the Bankruptcy Act and all that, but I think these three factors together determine how entrepreneurship happens in a society. For example, I live in the United States. You can file Chapter 11 bankruptcy and move on, right, and do something else. And if you have a good business plan, the bank looks at that plan and says, okay, your credit takes a hit, but you're not barred from accessing a new credit, and therefore you have these serial entrepreneurs who either sold their companies off and moved on, or they filed bankruptcy, and I have several friends whose earlier businesses didn't work and they moved on. So I think that translating that traditional economic thinking of where entrepreneurship, how do you encourage entrepreneurship? What are the areas which need, I would say, regulatory support and all that? In the digital space, if we can, from moving from the problems that we have in the physical space, if we can move to a digital economy where the entry barriers are low, you can access whatever capital or credit you need to expand the business as your digital market expands, and you can exit anytime you want to, right? And this is what we are seeing. There is a virtuous cycle in this, right? The more people can get in, the more people can expand, the more people can get out. It just feeds back into the economy. So I think the beauty and the power, and why I was interested as an economist in open networks, is because of that there is an opportunity in India with young entrepreneurs like all of you to be able to break that 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 barrier of entry, the barrier to expand, and the barrier to exit, right? And that, I think, is the power of the open network, if that enables. Again, word of caution. It We have seen. I mean, again, going back to the Digital Markets Act, the EU has designated six companies as gatekeepers, people who control the market, right? And five of them are US companies. We know who they are, and one is ByteDance. Now, why is it important? It's important because Meta is a social media company, but it actually is restricting market for goods and services through its advertising and data capacity. So it, I think without proper, and again, I'm not criticizing the EU. I think they're on something which is really important, that you need that sweet spot, again, a sweet spot between regulation where the market can grow, something like account aggregators where entrepreneurs can access credit, be it small, be it big, and having proper, how would I say, corporate governance rules, which then allows venture capital, allows different forms of capital to come in, and then an exit policy which doesn't penalize an entrepreneur either for exiting in a good way or exiting in a bad way, which is essentially bankruptcy. So I think I've gone a little bit in a deep way on how I see this, the power of the open network playing out over the next 10, 15 years in terms of fostering entrepreneurship and growing this economy, and both the digital market and physical market, by the way.
No, that's a nice perspective, especially the comparison with the DMA DSAs and how I mean, the open networks are kind of increasing the opportunities, like you said, removing all the barriers that were existing in the physical world. I see, I mean, from the moment you started answering this question, I see a lot of questions coming in the chat. So I would request you whether you would like to kind of take a couple of those now or you would like to take those up later. It's okay. So
Sure.
I
No,
we
no.
have
Let's take it. Mhm.
Done, done, done.
Let's
So
take
we
some
have a
questions.
couple
Yeah.
of yeah, we have a couple of questions from Rajat. I will just summarize all the questions, then then you take up. I mean, as per your choice. I mean, which one you want to answer first. So we have from Rajat that how digital marketing is going to change with the presence of open networks, and also how the risk management is going to change with the open networks model versus the current ones. That is what Rajat is asking. Second is we have a question from Atri. She is asking how can we solve for trust in an open network, right? I think this is a really interesting one. And the third one is Raktin trying to understand why it's a digital network, not a digital platform. I think Raktin, we have a couple of contents around that. So if Anit is willing to take that up very well, otherwise we can help you with a couple of contents that we already have to kind of answer your question. So over to you, Anit.
Well, thank you. First of all, great questions. I was reading through them, scrolling through them. Let me take the last one first, which is network versus platform. And this is a good segue from what I was saying. Uh, so I was, I all, being old has its advantages.
No, you are
I
super young. You are not old.
thank you, thank you. You're very kind. Um, so uh, when I went to Japan in '95 to do my PhD, I remember that was the early days of the internet, and it was a fantastic time, right? I mean, I probably spent more time on a workstation, Unix workstation or whatever on Windows 95 than I should have done more in my economics courses. But what was interesting is that uh, you could actually go and set up a website. I did set up a website myself, and there was something called what was it? Digital squatters or something like web squatters. So somebody would just register bbc.com, and then they just squatted there until BBC realized one day that they have to have a web presence, and then they had to buy them out. So that was the initial internet. And I even, when Blogspot came out, which was Google's first foray, you could just get on, you know, on Blogspot and start writing blogs. And unfortunately, I didn't, but I could have been more famous than I'm than than now. But the idea is that it was open, it was friendly, it was a friendly space. I always use this term friendly to the initial days of the internet, right? And therefore, it was more of a network. It was less of a platform. I mean, there were no platforms essentially, right? Then Yahoo came. There were Ask Jeeves, which were the first search engines, and then the whole idea of platforms emerged, and that's pretty recent. I mean, if you look at historically, step back. I mean, the history of the internet is from 1969 or whenever Tim Berners-Lee started. The platformization of the digital system is only of very recent origin. Um, in Apple, for example, the Apple platforms start emerged after the first, I would say, iPhone 5 or iPhone 4, when the App Store became the hub of, you go to music, you have, the integration of the Apple ecosystem started in 2010. If you look at it, like in 10 years from where it was till where it is now, I mean, there's been a massive change. Same with Google. So I think, to Ruktin's question, I think it was Ruktin. The we are trying to go back to the original idea of the internet as a friendly space for, in this case, entrepreneurs, but also for people to engage at an individual level with a wider community. And I want to, want you to reflect on that. The rest we can all talk about technicalities and things like that, but going back to that idea that this is a friendly space. Okay, let me get on an open network and see who all are there, who's selling what, who's doing what, things like that. So that's where I think that beckoned me in some way, that in we are going back to that idea of a network, and at this point it has become imperative to break the platform monopoly. And again, going back to the Digital Markets Act in EU, how do you, with regulation, you can't break those monopolies. It only has to be through innovation, and both on the regulation, policy, and the tech side, that you can break those monopolies. And again, having as a like having a benefit of hindsight, I was reading something on BlackBerry the other day. BlackBerry and Nokia, like BlackBerry and Nokia were in 2005 those companies, right? And uh, who would have thought that in 10 years time they wouldn't basically exist? Um, and, and and that, I think, also tells you about how in companies which don't keep up to this change, and they lost out on the platform, right? They essentially didn't see it happening. They didn't see the revolution coming in data. And so I think that there are several other issues, and as Anirban said, that there are excellent videos on the Beckn website which talks about that. Risk management, I'm honestly not the best person to talk about it. There are obviously ways in which you can manage risk in a digital economy, and from an economist perspective, that's basically the same as you manage any other company, that you keep transparency, you have a accountable board, you kind of look at what are the risk returns. The only problem is that in a digital space, the changes are so rapid that today what is a risk-free investment, or less risky investment, can become very risky. And that's why I mentioned BlackBerry and Nokia as two examples where you're not being able to price in the risk of of the smartphone revolution. So we don't know. Maybe in 10 years time we'll have quantum and all this is moot. Like AI is going to be like, oh wow, we were excited about that. Things, so I think it's important to understand that from a risk management perspective, it's how you price the risk of another technical, the technology innovation is kind of critical. But again, I'm not the right person. Maybe Anirban, he has an MBA, he can, talk about risk
No,
management
no, we
better
will
than I can.
definitely keep a note of the questions, and we will get back to
Yeah.
the kind of people who are having the queries through our posts and blogs for sure.
But the last one is trust, and I'm glad that somebody, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, some raised it.
Atrey, I think.
Atrey raised it. Thank you. That's critical. That's the most important part of any business. That businesses build relationships of trust. Investors invest not because of your bottom line. At some point they trust you. I have a few friends who are venture capitalists, and they spend hours and days with their potential investors, not because they want to see, wow, how are they running their business, or what jazzy office they have, or how many dinners they're inviting, but whether they are trustworthy. You build that trust. So I think that is really important. And just on that, I did some work over the last 5 years on digital payments and trying to understand what are the, first of all, India's done amazingly well. So what are the determinants? And I won't go into all the papers; they're all on my website at ORF America. But the interesting thing that I found, and this was in a study in Bangladesh, where they changed the mode of delivering scholarships, primary education scholarships, and these are about 10 million, 13 million scholarships. So it's not a small program. They changed the modality from paying in cash at school to paying in through mobile wallets, right? So suddenly you have this shift, and these are mothers from mostly poor or not so technology savvy backgrounds. And So they receive the money and they just go to an agent and cash out, right? And so I try to understand why is that, right? And one thing that obviously they need the money, right? Then when the money comes in, they get the, whatever notification, they go and they cash out. The second one was actually trust. They don't trust that money, which is in intangible form, which is not cash, which is digital, is actually going to stay. And actually, in 2 months' time, they are going to be able to use that to buy certain things or to send money across. So it was an element of trust or lack of it, or lack of understanding of that this is trustworthy. That was one of the triggers. And again, these are not causal relationships, and these are all survey-based data that they were pulling out the money as soon as they were getting it. So the security of a physical transaction was far bigger than keeping the money there. And I think therein lies a big lesson for ONDC or with open networks, is that somehow or the other, the platforms have been able to generate that trust either through ratings, spurious or not, or through fulfillment, as you talk about fulfillment. That okay, I order something and something is delivered at the right time in the right way, and that is something that an open network will have to address, the trust issue. And until such time that the people trust an ONDC type of a system vis-a-vis a platform system, and both can coexist. One can learn from the other. And like, oh yeah, like I ordered from whatever ONDC app, and then it got delivered, and the food was great, and you know. So the comparison, you're looking at a trust threshold which is pretty high, and that's how I would characterize it in terms of moving to open networks.
Super. We will take the questions once again, but I think it's the right time to dive deep a bit into the missions of Open Gambia and Belém. I mean, if you can just let us know about the where it all started from, what is the aspirations, and where do we stand today, that would be really insightful for the audience.
Great. No, thank you. And Anirban, I must say, for the benefit of the audience, that you're being associated with it for first day as well. So thank you for that. And I know you've moved on to bigger and better things, but we still consider you as part of those missions. And I hope that one day we can travel there together. So as I mentioned in the opening, I think the India model now is at a stage of maturity where people are looking at it to learn what they can do. And every country in the world has realized, and especially after COVID, that digital economy and the digital systems need to be their focus going forward. And therein, India has inserted this idea of digital public infrastructure, which is different from digitization or digital infrastructure, where there is a role for the public sector, the government, regulation, policy, to set those rails upon which the train cars of innovation can move. And that is a very simple idea, but extremely difficult to put it into practice. I mean, it is probably the most powerful idea that I hope it will be taken up, but that might just fall flat. So what we are working on is to see whether this idea that we have of open networks, which is taking off in India, which has taken off in many ways, is applicable to a global context. And this is for two reasons. One is that the power of these ideas, until they are tested, and we know this from pure sciences, that you calculate something, and then when you do an experiment it falls flat, so you have to go back to your theory to say, well, what can we change in the theory to make it comply with reality. And for us, this is a reality check. So Gambia is a small 1 million country of 1 million people, surrounded on three sides by Senegal. I mean, I'm sure many of you are Googling right now, where is Gambia? But it's in West Africa. And one side is the sea, which is about 40 miles, 60 kilometers, and the rest is just a sliver of land. And interestingly, it's upper and lower Gambia because the river Gambia runs straight through the middle. So it's a very interesting. It's also the an Anglophone country in a Francophone area. So there's a different history. It was a British colony. Um, so through some through some quirk of fate, I had some in my previous job at the Center for Global Development. One of my colleagues is from the Gambia, and he was our IT manager. And I was as Pramod Verma, which many of you might know. He was visiting me, and then we started chatting. And then I introduced him to Saul, Suleiman, and they started chatting. And Suleiman said, "I loved your speech. Can we do something like that in the Gambia?" I all right, I mean, this is how we roll. So so the one thing led to the other, and it realized that he had some mentorship programs going on because he was a technical guy. He had an initial investment in some company which they tried to do some online stuff. One thing led to the other, and this is about April of 2022. So it's last year in April. And we started thinking about it. It's like, what is it that Gambia needs, or what are their challenges? So contextualizing their what is the need there, right? Rather than saying, well, we are doing this in India. Hello, here is the sandbox, right? No. So after a lot of back and forth challenges, and we'll write it up one day, um, we realized that it is a very, very fledgling ecosystem, but there are certain players. Now, for one thing, like in India, we get I would say intoxicated by scale. Like you always look at numbers. Oh, did we do 10 million last month or 15 million? This is a country of 1 million people, dude. So you know you need to be aware that you are not going to have a market which is the scale of India. So, but the challenges are the same, and especially on the regulatory side, on the infrastructure side. So we started working with the university, trained a cohort. Anirban gave some lectures, and now we have a situation where we have about three or four of the local. These are local online players. One of them is retail. The other is, I think, they do something on healthcare. Um, we are bringing them together on what we call the Open Gambia, and it will be announced in about months' time. We're going to start doing the BPP, BAP transactions, demo transactions, I think end of next month. And the idea is to test it out and see how we can create an ecosystem locally on the local needs. And it's very different. We came in into Gambia with an ONDC kind of a mindset. Oh, let's create a network. Let's do this. Let's do that. Then we realized, you know what? No, that's not the way it would work. So what we are doing now is we are Beckn enabling businesses. And the idea is like what we did with Aadhaar. Aadhaar had two when I used to work in Delhi. We had the inorganic seeding and organic seeding of Aadhaar. So Aadhaar being seeded into databases organically or inorganically, and slowly you see the Aadhaar linkage happening in many areas, right? So what we are doing is we are seeding the protocol into the digital ecosystem there. And that is different from creating a network and saying everybody should join. So we'll see how it goes. So that's the idea. And I think some of the lessons could be very powerful, right? In other geographies. If some of your entrepreneurial friends here want to go into Africa, which is going to be a huge market, we can think of what are the lessons from the Gambia. Now, Brazil is a different case. Brazil is high capacity. Oh, by the way, Gambia also there's a capacity issue, which anyone knows, and I'm not going to talk about. In Brazil, when we started, I used to live in Brazil for a bit, so it's a and I support Brazil in the World Cup as a football team. So I have a soft corner for the country. And one of my friends is the head of the government in a city called Belém, which not many of people would know, but it is the largest city in the Amazon region. So it's right up at the north of the country, and it's in a state called Para, which is the size of France. And two-thirds of that state is the Amazon forest. So, but Belém is a very interesting. It's one of the oldest cities in Brazil, which was founded by the Portuguese as a kind of a boat head for products coming from the Amazon, especially at that time rubber, which was harvested in Amazon, and then the ships would sail up the Amazon and go into Europe. So, Belém had this already an infrastructure and an ecosystem, and what they want to do now is to become a digital hub, but not in the way that we think. They want to be over the next 2 or 3 years. They want to be a hub of ecosystem services because of the proximity to the Amazon, the climate issue, and things like that. So how do you how do you generate a bioeconomy, like economy based on products which are sustainable from the Amazon, from other areas, and move away from the deforestation based beef and soya. So that's the broader, the policy objective. But what we are doing there is also that there is a big conference called the annual conference called COP, Conference of Parties, that happen every year. This is the biggest global conference on environment and climate. That's going to be held in Belém in 2025 in November. And we saw this as an opportunity to start activating an open network ecosystem where we would then expand the base, the industrial, the digital economy base. But we start with skilling. It's the honest, exactly kind of cut and paste of the honest, but not ONDC yet. But what we are doing is we're layering say, for example, we start with honest, we start with the Namayatri urban mobility, we start with digital services, public services, and then as we do that, we create a pool of talent who are then beckon enabled, or they understand the open protocol, open network. And then when we come to in the next year or so, hopefully, the bioeconomy, where then that critical mass had been created for an explosion in that space. So that's the idea of Brazil. And again, it's a country that is doing well economically, and we can go and see some football matches on the one hand.
Yeah, for sure. And my major takeaway from this is, Anit, that though there is a huge uptake from the hyperlocal ecosystem in terms of capability, skilling, and everything, there is also a huge entrepreneurial chance for or a collaboration opportunity for the people who are from this part of the world, given that they might be on the edge of the technology and they have joined the bandwagon a bit earlier. They can also go there and find out opportunities for collaboration, competition, and everything, right? So I think that is one of the major things that I'm taking away from your last answer. But one thing that you have again and again mentioned, that this is a global problem. So this is a solution that will fit probably all the geographies, but there are nuances in each and every geography, right? Like you said that, okay, we can't copy and paste something from India and kind of put it in Gambia. So other than the geopolitical kind of nitty-gritties, what are your major learnings? I mean, that you will try to, pass on to the audience in terms of say Aadhaar, UPI, or anywhere. I mean, open networks. If you want to replicate a model from one part of the world to the other part, what are the major concerns? What are the major things that one should keep in mind other than the macroeconomic factors?
A great question, and I think we are coming towards the end of the
Correct.
the lecture part. So um, I think there are three things that I would like to leave the audience with. One is what you're doing now sets the stage or sets the basis for what all the other stuff that you might have in mind that you'll do later. Like, here in the context is if you want to expand globally, right? So, they it's not an easy job to do the things that you're doing well right now, and then to take that abroad, right? So it needs a lot of attention and care. So if you do things well today, and if you're learning the lessons of what you're doing today, we talked about the markets, what are the challenges? I mean, why did you choose this vis-a-vis the other? The ONDC has so many different areas. So think about that a little bit before, you know, doing the things right now, essentially, right? Second is, I think what I have seen from the Aadhaar UPI and all the India Stack days is that the technology moves so fast that there is, and in economic terms, we call it obsolescence. Like obsolescence comes in really, really quickly, right? So, but what is obsolete in India may not be, maybe at the cutting edge somewhere else. So, it, and again, it's a feedback loop, right? So you might think that you are at the cutting edge here. When you go to a country like Kenya, and they're like, "Well, we've been doing this for 10 years, dude. I mean, don't come and try to sell that stuff." So I think understanding, if you want to expand, and I think we are at a stage when Indian entrepreneurs, digital entrepreneurs, should be looking outside, should be looking at different markets. It is understanding those markets and having trust. And again, coming back to the trustworthy um, partners, local partners, is critically important. You can't just go in and parachute and think things will be fine. That will not happen. Let me save you the suspense. Okay, even for our Gambia and Brazil initiatives, the core principle that we followed was we are going to work with the local partner because they know what the demand is, they know what the needs are, and we will understand that better. And the last one, I think, this is something that I really would like this community to understand, is that when you are at when you are taking a bet on something which is as out there as an ONDC, you bets might come off or not, but you would always learn something out of this experience. And what from the early days when we were doing Aadhaar, even the digital payment stuff, but anything like, for example, FASTag or DigiLocker, those things, you've shelved it, and then now they're coming back, and account aggregators and things like that. So I think, in a sense, whatever, even if you are not being able to grow the company to sell to a VC for whatever $1 billion, you would still learn something which is at the cutting edge. And just the participating in that is in itself a joy. As an economist, I really wanted to be part of this digital ID ecosystem, because when I worked in villages, one of the major complaints was we can't even prove who we are. How do you expect us to get a scholarship? How do you expect us to get an old age pension? So you are part of a solution, in a way, a part of a revolution, and that sometimes we forget when we have to answer to our bottom line. So I think those are the three, from an old man speaking, just some of the things that I'd like people to really reflect on and take action. The world is an oyster, and I'm sure uh, many of your participants will have the opportunity to go abroad and do amazing stuff.
That's super. I think we are just approaching the hour mark, but I would love to continue with this discussion. Probably we will have a episode two of this, but I will just wait for the audience to, if they have any of their last questions, that we can pick up probably one or two, and then we can let Anit move on. I think we have a couple of questions already there. Let me just pick one of them. Yeah, one was around the challenges which you kind of already answered. Will tech ecosystems restrict or allow cross-platform integration for open networks? Wouldn't that affect the open claim of networks into certain clusters? If I got that question correct, I think what Rajat is trying to kind of foresee is whether this open networks also kind of result in small, I mean, though we are calling it open, but whether will there be a one universal open network or there will be clusters of different open networks, and at the end of the day, it will kind of create an platform-like situation.
A great question. I think that's something that has exercised our minds pretty much. So one of the things that to answer that, I think an analogy would be important. Uh, the scientific community has these kind of open networks and clusters of open networks because not everybody can work on everything at the same time. So the COVID crisis was the best example. I mean, you had the sequencing, people were putting it up on a database, and then other people who were doing other stuff on that, like virologists and immunologists, they were drawing on that and they were doing their own thing in their network, all with the idea that we need to get this in, or under control and finally have a vaccine. So unless such open networks existed, unless you had the gene sequencing databases which were open, networks rather, which were open to draw on for the companies that were building the vaccines, you would have never seen a vaccine within a year, and that's a miracle. I mean, that truly is a miracle. Therefore, I don't see a problem with clusters of networks as long as they don't become platforms. And therefore, the network rules have to be pretty much the one that determines whether those networks then become platforms. Platforms, I think, for a network to become a platform, there's one thing that needs to happen is collusion. Like everybody or somebody just buys out the rest of the
Correct.
participants. So it's either predation or collusion. So there are no other way in which a network can become a platform, right? So I think in some way, understanding what are those ground rules that when you are part of a network is going to be an important, and we don't have the answer yet. At least I don't have the answer.
Yeah, true. I mean, I like your analogy, super analogy there. I'm going to use it for sure. But also, just to add to your point, I mean, if they are kind of coming to a point of clusters where it is actually beneficial for the market, there is no harm to it, then there is no objection point, right? I mean, unless they are harming the market behaviors, farm behaviors, I don't see as well like you. I don't see a negative connotation to it. But I think we are past the time. But thanks a lot, Anit. Thanks a lot for your time. On behalf of the whole Beckn community, I will like to thank you for your invaluable time and contribution. And for the folks out there as well, thanks a lot for your time and attention. If you guys are a part of the community, let us know how you like the session, what you will like to hear in the next session. Probably we will have another episode with Anit, what we will like to kind of know and learn there. And if you are not a part of it, just visit becknprotocol.io. You will find the link in the chat box. Feel free to join the community at Discord. So thanks a lot, Anit. Thank you again.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank
And
you.
thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye and see you soon.